Okay, so welcome back. So as you can see down here, I've created encapsulation layers for each of the elements of our picture, and I've also created a transformation, a rotate transformation for each of them as well within that encapsulation layer. So what that gives us, if I click on one of these, say the right arm, click on the rotate, it gives me the ability to rotate that particular element individually. Incidentally, what I've also done is create a master encapsulation layer called man, which contains all of these elements. As you can see, it's like a superset of all these components, and what that allows me to do is, if I want to move all the elements of the man across the screen, rather than move them all individually and risk getting them out of sync, I can just click on this man layer now, click on the position duck and drag it, and it'll move the whole man. So that's a really useful way of positioning the whole of a particular component like a man on the screen. Okay, so that's all very well. So we can rotate all the individual parts of the image, and we can actually move the whole man to a different position on the screen. But there is another problem here. So I can demonstrate this by clicking on this rotate trunk layer. Okay, so the trunk of the body here will be rotated when I move this rotation duck, but as you can see here, the trunk of the body has moved, but it's left his head and his arms behind, which is not exactly what we want here. So what we've got to do is to try and get the head and arms to move in synchronization with the trunk when we move it. Okay, and the way we do this is to take a copy of this rotate trunk transformation and copy that into the other layers that we want to move in unison with that transformation. But before we do that, what we've got to do is export it. So if I click on this rotate trunk layer here and move across to the properties window, you can see there are two properties for this rotate transformation. The origin, which is this point of rotation, and the amount, which is the rotation amount. So that corresponds to the two ducks we see on the screen. So to export these, I right click on the particular field and I choose the export option. It'll pop up a dialog box. Now you've got to give it a unique name here, so I'm going to give it rotate trunk. I'm just going to call it rotate chunk. That's fine. Just needs to be unique within the properties that you export. It can be the same name as one of your layers, for instance. I tend to export the origin as well, so I'm just going to call that origin chunk. Okay, jolly good. So as you can see, we've got this link icon now appears next to each of the properties. So we've got this layer. We now need to copy it into the other layers we want to move, notably the head and the arms. So if you right click over the transformation, you can choose copy. And indeed you can use Control C as well. And now I'm going to click down on the layer that I want to add a copy of this transformation into. So I'm going to click on head and I'm going to do a Control V. Okay, so you can see what we've got there is a copy of that transformation in the head layer now. So I also want to move the left arm. So again, I'm going to Control V that into there. And the right arm, which I think is right at the top, yeah. So there we go. So you can see if I scroll down, I've got not just one rotate trunk, but I've got 2, 3, and 4. And so this time, when I click back on my rotate trunk, I'm going to click back on the original layer and rotate it. You'll see that all those layers rotate in unison with this transformation. There are a couple of other places that we need to do it here, like with the legs. Obviously when you move the upper leg, you want the lower leg and the shoe to move in unison. So I'm just going to do that. And again, you can join me in just a few moments. Okay, so I have cloned out my upper leg transformation now. And hopefully if I click on the rotate right upper leg, you can see that the whole leg moves in unison with that upper leg movement. Similarly, the left leg should move as one unit, which it does. And so what we've ended up here with a fully posable model that we can use to do our animation with. So the way we do that is we basically get our model up here into its correct starting position. Okay, so we're finally in a position now where we can start animating. And the way we get into animate mode in Synfig Studio is to click on this green button down here in the bottom right hand corner of the canvas. And you can see when I click it, it turns red and we get a red bounding box around the canvas. So the way animation is done in Synfig is using a concept called keyframes, and this is best explained via an example. First of all, we need to check that we're at the beginning of the animation, so we're at frame 0. So if we look down in this frame counter here, we can see 0F, and that means frame 0, which is great. That's exactly where we want to do it. So we now need to move down into this bottom window here, where the properties window was, and if you look over to the right hand side you can see this icon labeled keyframes. It's got a little icon with a key in it. If you click on that, it will list all the keyframes currently defined. Of course there are none because we've only just entered animate mode. So let's go ahead and create our first keyframe. Click on this plus icon, add new keyframe, and you can see we have the new frame listed, and it's at frame 0, which is exactly where we want it. So at this point we need to pose our model in its starting position. Well, of course we imported it in its starting position, so there's no more work to do. So what I'm going to do is click on the next position that I want my model to move to, and that's at frame 12. I create a new keyframe down here. You can see it's created it at frame 12, and then I move my model to its new position. So in this case I'm just going to do something simple like lift his leg up. Okay, and that's our second keyframe. So again we click down in the timeline where we want the next keyframe. We click the plus button to add a new keyframe there. It's at 1 second, and then I move my model back into the position I want at 1 second. So I'm just going to get him to lower his leg down here. Okay, so we've now defined 3 keyframes. If I click back up in the canvas window and press this button, it seeks back to the beginning of the animation at frame 0, and I can use these buttons here to go forward to my next keyframe or backward. So you can see that's what's going to happen. So the great thing about Synfig Studio is that once you define these keyframes, it will generate all the intermediate frames between them to animate them. So what you can do is you can get a quick representation of what that's going to look like by clicking on the play button here. Okay, so that gives you a rough idea of what it's going to look like. It's just going to raise his leg and lower it. You also have the option of using the preview button, which gives you a much better representation, and you can specify a beginning time and an end time. In this case I'm just going to render 1 second and click the preview button, and you can see that this is now rendered, and I can click on that and you can see a much better representation of what the final image will look like, and you can get it to loop around. So we're just going to lift his leg up and put it down again. So that's the preview window, and when you've finished with that you can just close it, and you can just click on the caret and choose File Render. Okay, you can set up your options here for quality, etc., and the name you want to call it. It's going to export this as PNG format, so it's going to create a number of PNG files which you can then pull into a package such as KDEnlive to do the animation for you. You see you've got a message down here saying that it's rendering, and the good thing about Synfig Studio over some other packages is that the rendering process is done in the background, so you can carry on using the package while that's occurring. Okay, so once the rendering is complete, what you will find is, if you switch to your file manager, is a series of files have been exported, and there'll be 1 file per frame of animation. So for instance, we have got frame 0 here, frame 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., all the way on in the sequence up to frame 119. So what we need to do with these separate files is we need to pull them into a video editor to stitch them together. So what we do is, I'm using KDEnlive here, I click on Add Clip, navigate to the directory, click on the first frame in the sequence, and then click this button here which says Import Image Sequence, and then click on Open. Okay, so it brings it in as an 8-second clip which you can just pull down into the timeline, and if we control home and play, we'll see our animation in this window. And that's all there is to animating in Synfig Studio. Thanks for watching.